It was supposed to be just another Monday morning at Whitmore Global. But instead of small talk or a polite greeting, the first words out of the CEO's mouth cut through the air like a blade. "Danielle, I've been watching you for weeks now, and frankly, I think you'd be a better fit at a smaller firm. One where the pace isn't so demanding. You people tend to get overwhelmed." The room went still. You could feel the air change. 42 stories above Manhattan, in a boardroom lined with mahogany and glass, the comment hung in the air. Some executives shifted in their seats, pretending to review papers in front of them. Others avoided eye contact altogether. And then there were those few whose eyes stayed locked on Danielle, not with sympathy, but with the sharp curiosity of people watching a car crash in slow motion. At the head of the table sat Charles Whitmore, 55 years old, silver hair perfectly in place, posture straight like it had been trained in another era, and a voice carrying the authority of a man who had built a billion-dollar empire from scratch. Across from him sat Danielle Carter, 22, poised, focused, and most notably the only black intern in the company's elite summer analyst program. Her hands were folded neatly on her notebook. She didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She didn't give him the satisfaction of a visible reaction. That had been her rule since her first day here. No visible weakness. Whitmore leaned back in his chair, tapped his pen against the edge of the table, and glanced at the agenda in front of him. "You'll be paid through the end of the week," he said as if he were reading off a grocery list. And with that, the meeting rolled on, quarterly numbers, market updates, deal negotiations, as if a young woman's career hadn't just been casually brushed aside in front of 24 people. What Charles Whitmore didn't know was that firing her wouldn't be the end of this story. In fact, it was only the beginning. Whitmore Global wasn't just a company. It was a symbol, $20 billion under management, offices in New York, London, and Hong Kong, its name opening doors in boardrooms from Wall Street to the Far East. Getting into Whitmore Global's internship program was like winning a golden ticket. Every summer, thousands of Ivy League students applied. Only a handful were chosen. The selection process was brutal, top grades, glowing references, and a resume polished to perfection. Danielle Carter had earned her place the hard way. She wasn't a legacy kid. She didn't have a Wall Street uncle to pull strings. She didn't have family money to smooth her path. She grew up on the south side of Chicago, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts as a nurse just to keep the lights on. Danielle's talent with numbers was spotted early. She turned that gift into scholarships, top grades, and, eventually, an economics degree with honors from the University of Chicago. Her professors described her as 10 steps ahead. Her senior thesis had been cited by industry researchers. She had grit. She had skill. She had ambition. Everything about her resume said she should have been a rising star at Whitmore Global. But here none of that seemed to matter. From the moment Danielle stepped into Whitmore Global's marble lobby, she noticed it, the difference. The way some smiles tightened when she approached. The subtle pauses before handshakes. The quick glances exchanged between colleagues when she spoke. On her first day, she stood in line at the reception desk, smiling politely as the receptionist, a tall woman with perfect hair and a diamond watch, welcomed the intern in front of her by name and offered him a cappuccino. When it was Danielle's turn, the woman's smile faded like a switch had been flipped. "Deliveries use the side entrance," she said briskly. Danielle hesitated. "I'm here for the summer analyst program." The woman blinked, cheeks coloring slightly, and handed her a temporary badge without meeting her eyes. No coffee. No warm welcome. Just a quick wave toward the elevators. It was subtle, almost invisible, but Danielle had been navigating moments like this her entire life. She knew exactly what it was. By the third day, she was already feeling the undercurrent. During a high-level strategy meeting, Charles Whitmore himself was there. The team was trying to figure out how to protect the top client's portfolio from potential market volatility. Danielle had studied the numbers late into the night. She'd found a way to reduce the client's risk exposure by 12% without hurting returns. She waited for the right moment, then spoke. "If we reallocate 10% from high-volatility equities into..." Whitmore cut her off without looking at her. "Let's hear from someone with more experience." He turned to a white male intern across the table. That intern repeated Danielle's suggestion almost word for word. Whitmore smiled. "That's an excellent idea." The room chuckled quietly. Danielle leaned back in her chair, her face calm, her pulse thudding in her ears. It kept happening. In the break room, she overheard two interns whispering, "She's only here because they needed to fill the diversity quota." At security, she was stopped for badge checks 3 times in 1 week. Her white colleagues breezed past without so much as a glance from the guards. When she delivered a detailed financial report 2 days early, her manager, Lydia Harper, CC'd the entire team in an email accusing her of missing the deadline. Danielle responded with proof she'd submitted on time. No apology came. It was death by 1,000 cuts, each one small enough to dismiss, but together, impossible to ignore. One evening, long after most employees had gone home, Danielle sat in the lobby helping a junior analyst debug a complex risk model. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, equations filling the screen. Lydia passed by, glanced at the work, and smirked. "Cute hobby," she said. "But those formulas are a little above an intern's pay grade." What Lydia didn't know, what no one at Whitmore Global had taken the time to find out, was that Danielle had been published in the Journal of Financial Analytics for a breakthrough in predictive risk modeling. She didn't brag. She didn't need to. She believed results spoke for themselves. But here, her results weren't even being read. Then came the Thursday morning that changed everything. It started like any other high-pressure Thursday, but by 8:45 a.m., the atmosphere in Whitmore Global's top-floor conference room was unlike anything Danielle had ever experienced. Phones rang non-stop. Assistants darted in and out with updates. The entire risk analytics division was on edge. A top client, one worth $200 million in annual business, had been blindsided by sudden market losses overnight. Panic was spreading fast. If Whitmore Global couldn't produce a full, accurate risk model within 2 hours, the client would walk. Charles Whitmore stood at the head of the table, hands gripping the edge like the wood itself could steady him. "Give me the top people on this," he barked. His voice was clipped, each syllable sharp enough to cut paper. A junior analyst cleared his throat and spoke up cautiously. Danielle could. Whitmore didn't let him finish. "This is high-stakes finance, not a school project." The dismissal was so swift, so absolute, that the room moved on before Danielle could even react. She sat in the corner, silent, her laptop closed. To anyone watching, she looked disengaged, maybe even intimidated. But inside, her mind was already running the numbers. She'd been tracking the client's portfolio for weeks, running her own independent models for practice. And she knew exactly where the problems were, and how to fix them. But the top people, the ones Whitmore trusted implicitly, were fumbling. 10 minutes passed. 15. The models they produced were full of holes, outdated assumptions, and incomplete data sets. A senior partner muttered under his breath, "This is a disaster." Danielle's eyes moved to the clock. 90 minutes left. The first time she'd been underestimated in a room like this, she'd stayed quiet. The second time she'd spoken up and been ignored. The third time her idea had been stolen. This time she decided there would be no fourth. She slid her laptop out of her bag, the movement so quiet it didn't draw attention. Her fingers began to fly across the keys. Equations, asset reallocations, volatility simulations, all flowing from memory honed over years of practice and study. The rhythm was almost musical, a steady tap-tap-tap as formulas built on formulas. Across the table, Lydia noticed and raised an eyebrow. "Working on your resume already?" she said with a smirk. A few people chuckled. Danielle didn't look up. She was already halfway through. 40 minutes in, she'd run the most comprehensive model Whitmore Global had ever seen on this client's portfolio. 35 minutes after that, she'd refined it further, cutting projected losses by more than 15% while preserving long-term growth potential. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't copy the entire room. She sent the file directly to the client's lead contact with a concise note. "Urgent, Danielle Carter, risk analysis. Please review immediately." It took less than 5 minutes for the reply to come. The client's voice crackled over the speakerphone. "Whitmore, I just received a report from Danielle Carter? Who is Danielle Carter?" Every head turned. Whitmore's lips thinned. "One of our interns," he said quickly, as if that explained, or diminished, everything. "That would be me," Danielle said, her voice steady. The client didn't hesitate. "This is exactly what we needed. If Danielle's plan is implemented immediately, we'll stay. And frankly, maybe you should have her running your analytics department." The silence that followed was heavier than the air before a storm. Danielle reached into her bag and pulled out a thick folder. She set it on the table with a quiet thud. "This," she said, "is what I've dealt with since day one." The folder contained everything: printed emails showing her ideas dismissed or credited to others, time-stamped reports proving she'd met deadlines she was accused of missing, security footage stills of repeated badge checks while her colleagues walked past unchallenged. And there was more, detailed notes on every subtle and overt act of bias, documented with precision. Whitmore's jaw tightened. Lydia shifted in her chair, her face pale. The client's voice cut in again, colder now. "Mr. Whitmore, you have a serious problem here." Whitmore started to speak, but Danielle's phone buzzed. She glanced down. A name flashed across the screen, a name that would change everything. And with that, the real fight began. Danielle's phone buzzed again. Same name. Same urgency. She glanced at the caller ID, and for the first time all morning, the corners of her mouth twitched into something resembling a smile. She tapped the screen and answered on speaker. "Danielle Carter?" The voice was crisp, professional, and unmistakable to those who knew the industry. "This is Margaret Liu, Senior Investigative Correspondent for Financial Truth Weekly. I understand you're in the middle of a client crisis meeting." The room froze. Financial Truth Weekly wasn't just a magazine. It was the one outlet every major firm feared, the one that had taken down 2 hedge fund CEOs and exposed an insider trading ring just last year. Whitmore's eyes narrowed. "Ms. Liu, this is an internal matter." "Actually," Margaret cut in, "it became external the moment a certain audio file hit my desk this morning. A file in which you, Mr. Whitmore, tell a young black woman that people like her get overwhelmed and should work at smaller firms." A collective intake of breath swept the room. Lydia shifted uncomfortably. The junior analysts avoided eye contact. Danielle sat completely still, letting the weight of the words settle like dust on a deserted street. Margaret continued, her voice razor-sharp. "We've also received documentation of repeated discriminatory incidents, along with video evidence from your own lobby security cameras. We're running a feature on systemic bias in elite finance firms, and, well, this is looking like the opening story." Whitmore's carefully constructed composure began to crack. "This is a breach of confidentiality." "It's not," Margaret interrupted smoothly. "It's whistleblowing. And unless I'm mistaken, retaliation against whistleblowers is a federal offense." The conference room door opened suddenly. One of the executive assistants, cheeks flushed, eyes wide, hurried in and handed Whitmore a folded piece of paper. He scanned it and his face went completely still. Danielle didn't need to read it to know what it said. News travels fast at the top. The client, the $200 million account, had already sent a written notice to the board demanding immediate investigation into workplace discrimination. Whitmore looked up, his eyes locking with Danielle's. There was no arrogance now, only calculation. "We can resolve this internally," he said, his tone quieter, almost coaxing. Danielle leaned back in her chair. "If that were possible, we wouldn't be here." Margaret's voice came through again. "Miss Carter, I'd like to schedule a formal interview. Off the record for now, unless you decide otherwise." Danielle thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. "On the record," she said. "Every word." Whitmore slammed his palm on the table. "You have no idea the damage you're doing?" "Oh, I have a very good idea," Danielle replied, her voice low but clear. "It's the same damage you've been doing quietly for years. The only difference is, now people will see it." For a beat, no one moved. Then the speakerphone clicked off. Outside the glass walls of the conference room, employees were starting to gather, sensing the shift in power. Some stood openly watching. Others pretended to be on their phones, their eyes darting toward the meeting. Danielle gathered her folder, slid it into her bag and stood. "You'll be hearing from my attorney," she said. Whitmore's voice followed her as she walked to the door. "If you go public, you'll never work in finance again." She stopped, turned slightly and met his gaze one last time. "If I stay silent, I'll never work with my integrity intact. And between the two, I know exactly what's worth keeping." When she stepped out into the hallway, the whispers were instant. Phones discreetly recording. Someone murmuring, "That's her." By the time Danielle reached the elevator, her phone was buzzing nonstop. Messages from friends, professors, even strangers on LinkedIn who'd already seen snippets of the leaked audio making its rounds online. Down in the marble lobby, she walked past the same receptionist who had once told her deliveries used the side entrance. This time, the woman's eyes were wide. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but Danielle just kept walking. Out on the street, Manhattan's morning rush was in full swing. Taxis honking, the low rumble of delivery trucks, the hum of conversation. Danielle pulled in a breath of sharp city air and let it out slowly. She had no idea what would happen next. But for the first time since stepping into Whitmore Global, she felt free. What she didn't know yet was that in less than 24 hours, the story would explode. By 8 a.m. the next day, #WhitmoreExposed was trending in 3 countries. The leaked audio, just 18 seconds long, was everywhere. Instagram Reels, TikTok edits, LinkedIn think pieces. Over slow piano music, captions spelled out the words Charles Whitmore had spoken so casually in that boardroom. You people tend to get overwhelmed. News anchors dissected the clip on live TV. PR analysts debated the fallout. Advocacy groups issued statements calling for Whitmore's resignation. Whitmore Global's Manhattan headquarters looked the same from the outside, the sleek glass tower catching the morning light, but inside it was chaos. On the 41st floor, the communications team was crammed into a war room, laptops open, coffee cups everywhere. Every few minutes someone would shout, "Another outlet picked it up," or "The Wall Street Journal just posted." In the corner, Lydia Harper was pacing. Her phone buzzed relentlessly, angry messages from contacts she thought were friends, requests for comment from journalists she'd avoided for years. She hadn't even spoken to Whitmore yet that morning. When she finally found him in his office, he was staring at his computer, jaw tight. "They're calling for your resignation," she said flatly. He didn't look up. "It'll blow over." Lydia hesitated. "Sir, it's not blowing over. The board's holding an emergency meeting at noon." Whitmore finally turned, his eyes cold. "You think they'll side with her over me?" Down in the lobby, employees moved in clusters, whispering. Some were watching a live stream on their phones, Danielle's first interview with Margaret Liu. On screen, Danielle sat in a modest studio, wearing a navy blazer and no visible makeup. Her voice was calm, her words deliberate. "I didn't come forward for revenge," she said. "I came forward because silence protects the system, not the people trapped inside it. And I know what it's like to be the only one in the room, constantly proving you belong there." The clip cut to her describing the $200 million client crisis, how she solved it in 35 minutes while the so-called experts ignored her. The interviewer didn't need to editorialize. The facts spoke for themselves. Within an hour, Danielle's inbox was overflowing. Invitations to speak at industry diversity summits. Messages from young analysts sharing their own experiences. Recruiters offering meetings, strictly off the record. At 11:59 a.m., the Whitmore Global Board of Directors gathered in their largest conference room. Every seat was filled. Some directors joined via video from London and Hong Kong. The chairwoman, Eleanor Price, didn't waste time. "We've reviewed the leaked audio, the supporting documentation, and the media coverage. This is an existential risk to the firm." Whitmore leaned forward. "I built this company, and you're about to destroy it," Eleanor interrupted. "Our major clients are threatening to withdraw. Our stock is down 12% in 24 hours. You have until close of business to tender your resignation, or we'll remove you." The silence that followed was suffocating. Whitmore scanned the faces around the table, people who'd once hung on his every word. Now they wouldn't meet his eyes. By 3 p.m., the news alert hit every phone in the building. Breaking: Charles Whitmore steps down as CEO amid discrimination scandal. Employees looked up from their desks. Some whispered. Others smirked. A few clapped quietly. Danielle was at a cafe in Midtown when she saw the headline flash across her screen. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She just took a slow sip of her coffee and kept reading. It wasn't over. Not yet. The same alert announced that Lydia Harper had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. And in a smaller paragraph near the bottom, something caught Danielle's eye. Sources say the Whitmore Global Board is considering a major restructuring of its analytics division. She knew exactly what that meant. For the first time since this all began, Danielle allowed herself the thought, "I might actually change this place." 2 weeks later, Whitmore Global's iconic W logo still gleamed on the skyscraper, but the air inside was different. Gone were the hushed, arrogant conversations in the elevators. Gone was the sense that every word and gesture had to align with the unwritten rules set by one man's ego. Danielle Carter hadn't stepped inside since the day she sent that email to the $200 million client. She'd been busy, speaking at panels, guest lecturing at universities, and quietly consulting for firms who wanted to avoid becoming the next Whitmore Global. Then, on a rainy Tuesday morning, she got the email. Subject: Proposal for discussion. Danielle, the board would like to meet with you regarding a leadership opportunity within Whitmore Global's analytics division. Respectfully, Eleanor Price, board chair. Danielle stared at it for a long time. This was the same company that told her she was overwhelmed and out of her depth. The same marble hallways where security guards triple-checked her badge. She could delete it, move on, build something new elsewhere. But there was another option: walk back in on her own terms and remake the place from the inside out. At 9 a.m. Friday, she stepped out of the elevator onto the executive floor. The walls were still lined with the same expensive art, but there was no Charles Whitmore waiting at the end of the hall. Instead, Eleanor Price greeted her with a firm handshake. "Thank you for coming, Danielle," she said. "We've done a thorough review. Your predictive risk modeling saved a client we could not afford to lose. The board believes the analytics division needs a new kind of leader." Danielle listened without committing. "We're prepared to offer you the role of head of risk analytics," Eleanor continued. "Full control of your team. Authority to build it from the ground up. Independent oversight on diversity and equity." It was everything Danielle had wanted on paper, but she knew better than to take the first offer. "I'll consider it," she said. "On one condition." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "That my first act be creating a recruitment pipeline for underrepresented talent," Danielle said. "Full transparency in hiring data, independent equity audits, and no veto power from the board on those audits." Eleanor studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Done." By Monday morning, the news was out. Breaking: Danielle Carter returns to Whitmore Global as head of risk analytics. The headlines framed it as a redemption story, but Danielle didn't see it that way. This wasn't redemption. This was reclamation. Her first day back, she walked the floor of the analytics department. Some employees looked surprised to see her. Others avoided eye contact. A few, the ones who'd quietly supported her, gave small nods of respect. She didn't waste time with speeches. She called a meeting, laid out her vision, and made it clear. "This division will be built on results, not resumes. If you have ideas, I want to hear them. If you've been overlooked before, that ends now. And if you can't operate in a space where talent comes before bias, you won't be here long." Outside the meeting room, someone whispered, "She's really doing it." Inside, Danielle opened a slide deck labeled Project Reclaim, her blueprint for dismantling the culture that had once tried to erase her. And for the first time in a long time, the air at Whitmore Global felt like change was actually possible. Danielle's first 90 days as head of risk analytics were not smooth. On paper, she had authority. In practice, she was stepping into a space still haunted by the ghost of Charles Whitmore, not just his policies but the people who had thrived under them. In the first week, 3 senior analysts resigned without notice. The official reason: pursuing other opportunities. The unofficial reason: they didn't want to report to an activist in a suit. Danielle didn't flinch. She replaced them with 2 sharp young analysts from state universities, neither with Ivy League pedigrees, both with groundbreaking research under their belts. The third position she left open, deciding it would be filled by someone who could prove themselves internally. Resistance came in other forms too. A budget request for upgraded risk modeling software, something the department desperately needed, got lost twice before reaching the board. Meeting invites mysteriously disappeared from her calendar. A vendor she'd worked with for years suddenly cut ties, later admitting they'd been warned that partnering with her could be bad for business. Danielle recognized the pattern. Quiet sabotage. The same tools that had been used to push her out were now being deployed to undermine her leadership. She didn't fight them head-on. She documented everything. Dates, times, email trails. She built her own ledger of accountability. By month 2, she launched the recruitment pipeline she'd promised. Dozens of applicants from underrepresented backgrounds applied for the first open junior analyst positions. Some senior managers balked. "These kids don't have the right pedigree," one complained. Danielle's reply was simple. "The markets don't care about pedigree. They care about accuracy. If they can deliver results, they're in." Then came the first real test. A hedge fund client, Whitmore Global's third-largest account, faced exposure from a sudden collapse in a Southeast Asian commodities market. Billions were at stake. Traditionally, the crisis would have gone straight to the most senior white-shoe analysts in the firm. Instead, Danielle split the work, pairing veteran analysts with 2 of her newly recruited hires. The murmurs started immediately. "She's gambling with $1 billion account to make a point." In 48 hours, the team delivered a strategy that not only saved the client's position but turned a projected $320 million loss into a $47 million gain. The client CEO sent Danielle a personal note. "If these are the kind of results your pipeline produces, keep hiring." That same afternoon, Eleanor Price stopped by her office. "You've made believers of some very skeptical people," she said. Danielle allowed herself the smallest smile. Results speak louder than resumes. But even as victories stacked up, so did the shadows. A confidential email, marked "For Board Review Only," landed in Danielle's inbox by mistake. The subject line: concerns about Carter's leadership. She read the first paragraph, accusations of divisive hiring practices, alienating senior staff, and prioritizing social agendas over profitability. It was unsigned, but she recognized the writing style. Lydia Harper. She was supposed to be gone. And if Lydia was back in the picture, that meant someone inside was helping her. Danielle didn't react immediately. She knew the trap: confront too soon and they close ranks. Wait too long and the damage spreads. So she played it cold. For 2 weeks, she acted as if she hadn't seen the email. She signed off on reports. She attended board meetings. She mentored her new hires. But every spare moment she dug. Her first move was subtle, asking IT for a review of departmental data flow under the pretense of streamlining analytics. What they didn't know was that she'd embedded a request to track document access patterns. 3 days later, the report came in. The board review-only email had been opened by 3 people, 2 current board members, and a terminal registered to the firm's external communications room, a room not supposed to be connected to internal servers. The keycard used to access it belonged to a temp assistant in the PR department. A temp who had worked for Lydia Harper before Danielle ever stepped foot in the firm. The pieces were clicking together. It wasn't just Lydia. Someone high up was feeding her internal documents, the kind of inside ammunition that could get Danielle removed without the board ever having to admit bias. By week 3, Danielle had a full map of access logs, IP addresses, and meeting overlaps. The pattern was clear. One board member, Robert Hensley, was quietly passing data to Lydia through off-site PR consultations. Hensley had been a Whitmore loyalist for 20 years. If he was involved, this wasn't a personal grudge. It was a campaign. Danielle needed proof they couldn't spin. Proof that showed not just sabotage, but intent. The break came from an unlikely source. One of her junior hires, a former cybersecurity student, caught a packet of outgoing data from the PR server. It was an audio file. Danielle listened. It was Hensley's voice. "Carter's making too many changes too fast. If we can paint her as unstable, the board will vote her out. Keep pushing the narrative. And make sure the next leak hits the journal before quarter end." Her pulse stayed steady, but her hands curled into fists. She'd been through worse. She'd survived worse. But now she had them, in their own words. She could have gone to Eleanor Price immediately. She could have blown it open. Instead, she decided to play one more move. If they wanted a war, she'd choose the battlefield. Danielle called her most trusted analyst into her office, shut the door, and slid the file across the desk. "I need this in 3 places at once," she said. "Our secure server, an encrypted drive, and a dead-drop email account with a 72-hour timed release." The analyst hesitated. What happens in 72 hours? Danielle's eyes didn't waver. They either confess, or we let the world hear exactly how Whitmore Global still does business. And that's when the phone on her desk lit up, a private call from an unlisted number. She answered. A voice she hadn't heard in over a year came through the line. "Well," Lydia Harper said softly, "looks like we're not finished after all." Danielle's chair didn't move. Her voice stayed level. "I thought you left the city, Lydia?" A low chuckle on the other end. "You don't think I'd watch you waltz in and dismantle everything I built without saying hello, do you?" "Everything you built?" Danielle said. "Funny. From where I'm sitting, you built a culture where good people kept their heads down while the rest rotted from the inside." "Oh, spare me the morality play," Lydia replied. "You think the board's clean now? You think Eleanor Price is some savior? She's been using you as cover, Danielle. As long as you're here, she gets to say Whitmore Global is progressive without actually changing the core. You're the brand, the token, the photo op." Danielle's jaw tightened. "You've been working with Hensley." Pause. "You're smarter than they give you credit for. But you're still naive if you think you can win this. The people pulling the strings don't care about your credentials, your awards, or your little redemption story. They care about control. And I'm still their best option to keep it." Danielle leaned back, eyes fixed on the Manhattan skyline. "Then why call me? Why not just let the board do your dirty work?" "Because," Lydia said, "I'd rather you walk away on your own terms than watch what's about to happen to you in public." "You're bluffing." The laugh came again, colder this time. "Am I? Check your inbox, Danielle. And remember, once it's out there, there's no coming back." The line went dead. Danielle opened her email. At the top of her inbox was a message from an anonymous address. One attachment. One word in the subject line. Proof. She clicked. A grainy surveillance still filled the screen. Danielle, in the lobby of Whitmore Global, in conversation with a man she didn't recognize. The timestamp was from 2 weeks ago. The caption beneath it read, Whitmore head of risk analytics caught meeting with whistleblower tied to insider trading probe. Her mind scanned back. The man had approached her out of nowhere, asking for directions to another firm in the building. She hadn't even known his name. They were building a case. A fake one. And if that photo made it to the financial press, she wouldn't just lose her job. She'd be radioactive in the entire industry. She didn't close the email. She copied it, archived it, sent it to her private encrypted drive. If Lydia thought she was going to scare her off, she had chosen the wrong opponent. Danielle stood, grabbed her coat, and walked out of her office without telling anyone where she was going. There was only one place she could get ahead of this, and it wasn't Whitmore Global. It was a quiet brownstone on the Lower East Side. And inside was the one person who had taken down a Wall Street giant before, and lived to tell the tale. When the door opened, the woman standing there froze for a moment, then smiled faintly. Danielle Carter. I wondered how long it would take before you showed up. Danielle stepped inside, shutting the door behind her. The brownstone smelled faintly of coffee and old paper, the kind of scent that clings to places where secrets are kept. The woman she'd come to see, Marisol Vega, had once been the most feared compliance officer on Wall Street, until she blew the whistle on a billion-dollar fraud scheme, and vanished from the industry. I hear you've made some enemies, Marisol said, motioning Danielle to sit. They're fabricating evidence, Danielle replied. And if they succeed, I'm finished. Marisol sipped her coffee. Then you don't fight it in court. You fight it in the open. You flip the script before they can run it. For the next 3 hours, the two women pieced together a plan. Danielle would leak Lydia's and Hensley's private communications, the ones proving they tried to sabotage her, not to the press, but to Whitmore's largest institutional clients. The kind of people who didn't care about gossip, but cared very much about a firm's stability. 2 nights later, the first email went out. Then another. And another. By Monday morning, Whitmore Global was in crisis mode. Not because of Danielle's supposed scandal, but because its top clients were demanding an explanation for the betrayal happening inside the firm. The board acted fast. Hensley was forced out. Lydia disappeared without a statement. And Eleanor Price called Danielle into her office. You've made enemies in powerful places, Eleanor said. But you've also proven you're the only one here willing to protect this firm at all costs. Danielle's expression was calm. Not the firm. The people who work here. The ones who actually make it run. Eleanor studied her for a long moment, then extended her hand. You have my support. Full stop. Months later, Whitmore Global's culture looked nothing like it had before Danielle walked through its marble doors. The equity pipeline she'd built was thriving. Anonymous bias reports were mandatory reading at board meetings. And one afternoon, standing in the lobby, she watched as a new class of interns arrived. A young woman stepped in, black, nervous, clutching a cheap leather briefcase, and the receptionist smiled warmly, greeting her by name, offering coffee. Danielle didn't interrupt. She just smiled. Because she knew the change wasn't perfect and the fight wasn't over. But she also knew one thing for certain. Sometimes, the most dangerous person in the room is the one they thought they could silence. If you believe stories like Danielle's need to be told, stories that pull back the curtain on the discrimination they try to hide, hit subscribe to Racism Exposed. Because the only way to end it is to expose it.